Welcome to the Generation to Generation podcast, the podcast series to help you navigate the process of helping your aging parents. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk, and I am joined, as always, by Chris Kellogg, educator at Shalom. Chris, how are you?
I'm good.
Well, today we are joined in this episode by Dan Simon, who is a mediator who works extensively in family and conflict mediation. And Dan, you were saying before we started recording, sometimes conflict can be good.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not always a negative.
Well, sure. It's good in the sense that it's the result of people caring about things. And so, for example, siblings who are concerned about the care of their parent, that's a good thing. And the chances of the siblings being totally aligned with each other all the time aren't that great. And so, it's not a question of whether there will be conflict, but it's more a question of how to manage it once it happens.
So what are some tips you could offer for how to maybe nip things in the bud before feelings get too hurt? Because I'm sure in your role you see that all the time where they come to you and think they're not too far gone, but they're pretty far gone.
They're usually pretty far gone by the time they get to me, actually.
Okay.
But
okay.
And it's pretty hard to generalize because every family is unique, and what is appropriate in one situation isn't so appropriate in another. I guess the one generalization I can make is that because conflict is so common and natural, try not to be too freaked out when it happens, and since I started paying attention to these things, I've noticed that every family that I know well has conflict. It just is part of the deal, and, such things as one sibling being estranged from the others is not uncommon. And so, for example, that's an especially challenging one when the parents get to a point where they need some attention, and there's one sibling that hasn't talked to the other siblings for years. That conversation can be especially kind of anxiety-provoking before it happens. So I kind of jumped ahead there to kind of the extreme situations, but that's what I see the most of.
No, that's okay. I think like you said, because everybody has conflict, sometimes taking a look at what the extremes are isn't necessarily such a bad thing. Right.
That's right. In fact, it's nice to feel better by comparison that your family isn't, as bad as some are. But everybody has it, and so not being ashamed of it and trying not to be so shocked or surprised when it happens even to your family, I think helps. It helps you kind of be willing to face up to it and say, okay, we've got something to deal with. We've got to handle this. We've got to address it.
So you mentioned, estrangement, siblings being estranged from the other, but if, say, the estranged child is not estranged from the parents and they still want an active role, what are some ways that you work with families to sort of help bring that sibling back, into the fold with the others so it can be a productive conversation on behalf of the parents?
Sure. Well, if it gets to the point where they become aware that they want some professional help and they invite me to do so, and everybody's willing to participate, that's also a question. Sometimes, some of the siblings are up for it and others either don't think it's necessary or don't even want to engage with the siblings in that way. So the first and most challenging question is who's willing to participate. If I am going to participate, then it's a question of how to help everybody who's involved have a conversation in which they get to do what they want, actually. And as I see it, we are all kind of constantly trying to manage taking care of ourselves with taking care of the others around us. In kind of the ideal state, we get to a point where we ourselves feel secure and like we're okay, and that allows us to pay attention to our siblings and help us pay better attention to our parents. And so it's what I try to do is provide the space and attention that allows people to figure out kind of what they need to do incrementally to get to a better place. I know that was very abstract, but it's everybody's different, and so it's a different kind of set of issues that they're struggling with. It's just some support for getting the clarity about how to proceed.
Well, and I think one thing that people sometimes think is, well, if we can't get everybody at the table, then there's no point in doing a mediation. But certainly you can have these family discussions recognizing.
Sure. I do that a lot. It's, I sit down with 3 of the siblings, and part of what they're trying to figure out is how to deal with the 4th sibling. And sometimes those 3 are on different pages about that. So help them get some clarity about how to manage that situation is something I help with. I don't mean to presume that I'm always necessary in these situations, though. In a lot of situations, it really is just about the siblings themselves being aware that this is a big deal, and being aware that the path toward a better place is a conversation, difficult though that might be. And so all of them kind of getting their own support from their own therapists, you know. Also, if there's a family therapist that somebody's connected to, I know JFS and JFCS have therapists, for example, on staff that help with family conflict. So we hear about marital therapy all the time. Siblings sometimes find it helpful to engage in therapy as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, my thing, of course, is more precisely geared towards certain disputes that come up as opposed to a long-term thing. So if the family wants to work longer term on their relationships, that's probably a therapy thing. If it's we really need to have a good conversation about the next step for mom, then that's probably my thing because I can just help that conversation go well.
And how often does mom or dad end up in this conversation?
It varies. Sometimes they do. I mean, if they want to, it's ideal if they do. Sometimes they aren't in the condition where that makes sense so much, but they sure can. And even if they aren't, at full capacity, just having them present and having them able to express themselves can be, a beautiful, important part of the process too.
Yeah.
So, is siblings, often move across the country. How do you work with when you have, the parents and then some siblings in town and then other siblings are sort of spread around the country? How do you help bring them all together?
It's great if they can all meet in the same place. If not, video conferencing. I do that all the time. Yeah.
So modern technology works in this case.
It helps a lot in this case, yeah. Video conferencing, just being able to see the other person is definitely a step up from just a phone call. But often people schedule it, they have a plan to all come to town and pay attention to the parent, and so we all get together at my office then in Minneapolis.
Well, and one of the things you talked about, too, is kind of helping people see their different roles. Like different family members have different strengths and kind of helping people sort of see each other for the strengths they bring as opposed to the opposition they might offer.
Absolutely. I mean, that is a beautiful benefit of a good conversation. You can figure out how everybody can help in the way they want to, in the way they feel most competent at. Everybody really wants to feel like they are contributing. And so when you get in the mode where one sibling's contributions don't feel to the other siblings like a contribution, that's the hard part. Mm-hmm. But if you can help, kind of transform that into everybody feeling like they get to contribute, it can turn into, it can really change in a big way. You can really get back to a harmonious thing. I've seen a few families I've worked with who had struggles for years, and this crisis around caring for a parent is really the thing that kind of turned it around and got them back toward some harmonious sibling relationships. So that's where conflict can be a beautiful opportunity to really improve things.
Yeah, I saw it actually with my own family when we all lived in different parts of the country and came together and really focused on helping my parents, and it was a beautiful opportunity to reconnect as siblings.
That is the best case scenario. That can happen. Yeah.
What is it about that you've seen, at least, caring for parents that is so stressful and that could put that kind of stress on a sibling relationship? Well,
even, aside from the conflict, it's just hard to see your parent now who was someone you looked up to and relied on for your own care when you started out to be switching roles. It's kind of mind-blowing, and it makes us think about our own mortality. We're all heading that direction. It's a big, profound thing. If you add to it that there are long-standing relationship challenges within the family, that, there's always been a sense that your sibling was the favorite one, and, you're still trying to get dad's approval, and he never quite gave it to you, but you feel like you got to take care of him. It can get complicated on a lot of levels.
So what are some easy, might not be the right word, but, maybe easy tips that people can do maybe before it gets to, to becomes that bad.
Yeah. Well, I think conflict is the greatest opportunity to learn that serenity prayer thing about what we can control and what we can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's not so easy. That's why it's a prayer. You need help with it. But it's being aware that you really can only control your part of it. You can't get your sibling to be a different person. And so, I don't know, it's kind of, that's the generalization, and then how that applies to any situation, it's just making sure that you are living up to your values. We all would rather be kind and generous and giving. The only reason we aren't that way sometimes is because we ourselves feel like we're being victimized at some level. So pay attention to yourself, get all the support you can around the ways in which you're feeling threatened or diminished in some way. Get yourself to the best possible place, and then you're more able to deal with your siblings and others constructively.
Well, Dan Simon, thank you very much for joining us. This
My pleasure.
is definitely an area that I didn't think we'd be talking to a mediator about, but I think there's definitely some important tips and lessons in there, and we appreciate your guidance in this area.
Thanks so much, Lonnie. Glad to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, you're welcome.
The Generation to Generation podcast is sponsored by Shalom Home and produced by Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to shalom.com. That's SHOLOM.com or tcjewfolk.com/podcast.